relationship between Iran and the US went from bad to worse after Iranian forces shot down a US drone.
I think a lot of restraint has been shown by us, a lot of restraint, and that doesn't mean we're going to show it in the future.
Their relationship, or what's left of it, was already strained by America's withdrawal of the Iran nuclear deal, more US sanctions, and a travel ban. On this show, we'll look at the standoff between two enemy states through the eyes of the people closest to the story, America's Iranian community. Here in New York, The Square starts now. Welcome to Times Square in New York. I'm Sally Ihart. In this show, we'll be talking about the escalating crisis between the US and Iran and asking whether there's going to be another war. And we want to get you involved. You can send us your questions and comments to us on Twitter and Facebook at TRT World and be part of the conversation. Now, the diplomatic relationship between the US and Iran has been in a nosedive since May 2018, when President Trump announced he was abandoning the 2015 nuclear deal. The US president immediately started to bring back sanctions against Iran. But Trump's hardline stance against Iran began far earlier into his presidency, when he listed Iran as one of the countries on his travel ban, an executive order preventing people from 5 Muslim countries from coming to the United States. And things have deteriorated further in the last month or two. Sets of explosions damaged 6 oil tankers in the Gulf region. The US says Iran is behind the attacks, which Tehran denies. Then there was the shooting down of the US surveillance drone over the Strait of Hormuz. So let's pick up on this with my guest this week. Here with me in the studio are Yeravand Abrahamian, who is a historian of Middle Eastern and particularly Iranian history, and independent Persians editor-in-chief, Camelia Etrikhabifand. Thank you both for joining me here on The Square. Now, first, let's start with you, Yeravand. Obviously, tensions have risen steadily since Trump has come to power. We've got the nuclear deal, we've got the imposition of steep sanctions, move to cut Iran's oil exports. Is this a war of words? What are his tactics here?
It is very serious. I mean, there are mixed messages coming from the White House. On one hand, there's talk about we should negotiate, we're offering to negotiate. On the other hand, there is a lot of warlike conversations about threats that Iran is the source of all America's problems, that the deal that was made was the very worst deal ever made by the United States. And the people basically who are making policy, Bolton, Pompeo, and many others, have a long record. It's not just recent, a long record of basically Iran must be eradicated, either the regime or the Islamic Republic or even Iran itself, because they consider Iran as a somehow existential threat. It's, I think, completely off the wall in terms of the exaggeration. But
Bolton has been a long sort of promoter of a strict regime overhaul of Iran, but he was also one of the chief advocates for overthrowing Saddam Hussein. Are we likely to see another Iraq war here?
Well, from their point of view, Iraq was successful. They got rid of Saddam Hussein. So even though, 1 million Iraqis got killed, and also, of course, the Middle East became chaotic after that. From their point of view, it was a success, because if you set the goal regime destruction, then you can say, well, as long as we can destroy the Iranian regime, it doesn't matter what the consequences are. That's a success. And I think that's what Bolton's thinking is.
So do you think, Camelia, this is just some firm posturing against one another, Iran and the US, or do you think that there is a chance of going to war here? Could we see a conflict?
I'm not seeing a chance that the two nations were entering to a war. In opposite way, I'm thinking President Trump wants to launch a campaign, and this campaign should be very smooth and without any issues, showing that he is after to having another war anywhere in the Middle East or anywhere else. He clearly, during his former campaign, mentioned that he wants to end the war in Syria, in Afghanistan, and we are hearing today he wants to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan. Some of American troops has been relocated in Iraq because his plan to withdrawing from Syria. having another one in Iran, it wouldn't give him any support in the United States. There could be clashes between the two nations, but we are too far away to launching a complete confrontation the two countries. And the small little comments about 2003 Saddam Hussein's time. The time has been changed. Iran is not Iraq, then so simply they can overthrow a regime, or they want to have the military.
But they can certainly try. But it was interesting, though, Yarvan, during the Obama administration, there was a slight easing of tensions there. The nuclear agreement put some sort of freeze on the situation. But now that the US has pulled out, what does the US want here? And what is the best way to deal with Iran to get it?
Well, that's what the mixed messages confuse people, because it's not clear what the aim is. It's one thing to say, you know, that Obama's deal was the worst deal, but what you're going to have instead? If the Trump administration really wanted to improve the deal, you could say, well, we have certain problems, we want to renegotiate that. But they basically tore up the deal and said, we start from scratch. And then on top of that, Pompeo gave what his 12 commandments, basically. Iran has to accept these 12 commandments before we can negotiate with Iran. And if you read those commandments, they are basically unconditional surrender. Then the question is, what is the aim of the United States? The only logic one can have is that the aim is regime destruction.
And is that so that Iran will be a better business player with Washington? A democratic government would be a better business player?
Well, they don't say what's the next government, because, you know, it could be of a worse government. I think their wish could come true. You can have the removal of the Rouhani government and a replacement by a much harder government like the Ahmadinejad, previous president, who would be much more confrontational, who also opposed the nuclear agreement. He was much more in favor of going full ahead with the nuclear program. Trump doesn't want war, but basically the road he's taken is eventually going to be some sort of military confrontation.
I just want to pause you there for a moment. I want to bring in now the Iranian diaspora here in the US for a bit of context. So let's pick up on that issue of the travel ban I mentioned earlier. We went to Los Angeles to talk to the Iranian community there about how the restriction of movement for them and their families and the escalating tension between Iran and the US is affecting them. It was 1979, and the US went from being Iran's closest ally to its biggest enemy. It was a series of events that resulted in the last monarch of Iran being overthrown. And the government was replaced with an Islamic republic ruled by the Grand Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini.
Khomeini was being helped down the steps of his chartered Air France jet to set foot on Iranian ground for the first time in 15 years.
There followed a mass exodus of Iranians to America's shores. Most were wealthy and highly educated Iranians who opposed the new regime. 4 decades later, and there are nearly 500,000 people in the US with Iranian ancestry. Economically speaking, they're a successful community. In fact, the per capita income of Iranian Americans is 50% higher than the national average. But 40 years of constant hostility between Iran and the US is weighing heavily on the Iranian community here.
Iranians are one of those minorities that have not asked the government to help them when they are here. They're all businessmen, they're doctors, professors, they are all successful here. The only thing they were not involved was politics. And I said, this is one area that I can shine and make the Iranian look good.
Jimmy Delshad is a successful businessman. He became the mayor of Beverly Hills in 2007, the first American Iranian to hold public office in the district. Jimmy is Jewish, but it was 9/11 that spurred him to get into politics after feeling targeted simply as a Middle Easterner.
When that happened, Anybody that looked at me saw me as a Middle Eastern, and it was a lot of anxiety and anger towards anyone that looked Middle Eastern. So I decided I want to change that by bringing a good side of that community.
40% of Iranian Americans live in California. Many wound up here because the climate is similar to Iran. And LA is home to the largest Iranian community outside Iran. Because many Iranian Americans can't go back, Tarangelis, an enclave of Los Angeles, is bringing a piece of Iran to them. Sociologist Ali Akbar writes critically about Iran and says that he'd be persecuted if he went back. Nowhere are the tensions between Iran and the US watched more closely than here in California. But many Iranian Americans support Donald Trump and his sharp political posture against Iran. When he opted out of the nuclear agreement and increased sanctions, some people here saw it as an opportunity to overthrow the regime.
They believe that Iranian people have no way or no chance to overthrow the Ayatollahs and the Islamic Republic. And the only way that the Ayatollahs can be overthrown, that regime can be changed, is by force, and that force is from outside rather than inside. And therefore, if Iranians have not been able in 40 years to get rid of the Islamic Republic, why not Mr. Trump to go in and with a strong hand and do what he did with Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi of Libya and so on.
The executive order that President Donald Trump signed into legislation soon after taking office, Iran was one of the 7 predominantly Muslim countries that had new immigrant and non-immigrant visas suspended. But Trump's so-called Muslim ban isn't just affecting Muslim Iranians. Many of the Iranian American community are Baha'i or Jewish.
It put the whole Iran and Iranian people into this category of people who are not allowed to easily come to United States. So it has affected them in many ways. The people who are here, those of them who are not citizens or do not have yet their legal status clarified, they find it difficult to leave United States and to come back.
Hani Fuladgur came to the US in 2010 to get his PhD. He and his parents are green card holders, but his sister missed out.
Everything was good until this travel ban came up. And it was in 2017 that I got my green card. My sister had her interview. This problem, I can say, this issue came up, and then she couldn't enter the United States. And this security check usually takes 1 month at most, or 2 months. But for her, it took, so far it took 2 years and a half.
Hani rented this apartment to share with his sister. Her room sits empty, baths and belongings still kept firmly in suitcases.
I brought all of her stuff in the United States. Her suitcases are there, full of new clothes that she bought just for the United States to be here. But I couldn't open them. I cannot hang them. The covers and the hangers are in her bedroom, but she is not. And it's a big tragedy for me and for my family. She's a doctor. She's doing whatever she can to treat people, to heal people. She is not bothering anyone. She is not killing anyone. She is not a terrorist.
It's not a new phenomenon. Young immigrants coming to the US in search for more opportunities. But what's different with Iranians is that they're often left trapped here, unwilling to risk not being let back in. Ferial Farazad came to the US to study. She's building a career as an interior designer in the US, but it's come at a cost.
Everyone is struggling. All my friends, except the ones that have green card or passport, the rest are struggling, and they haven't seen their family for a long time. And for instance, for me, I couldn't attend to my closest friend's wedding or these kind of events that happens in the family.
But it's a price she's willing to pay.
I think it's worth it because I'm really happy with my status in life. Like, I have a good job. I think I can grow as a designer in this city, and I think the future is good here, but there are pros and cons.
Artists are heavily censored in Iran. Since the revolution, any artist wanting to perform must adhere to a strict set of so-called moral guidelines. Ferhad Bazarati has been playing the qanun for 50 years and was banned from performing in Tehran.
Yeah, I mean, the religious people, they came, they were ruling the country, and they said the music is not allowed. So that's why I moved from Iran to Dubai, which it was the free country. Actually, it is free country. So I stayed there for 8 years, 8.5 years, and then I moved to United States. On my country, they know me. So if I go there, definitely they're gonna keep me there, and they're asking, okay, why did you play music? Why did you make a music video? Ladies in the music video or something, this is not allowed against our rule. It's gonna be a problem. So that's why I didn't go there anymore.
Ferhad says the Iranian regime is watching him, but regardless, he's still very proud to call himself Iranian. He runs a travel company that provides tours for Iranians wanting to holiday in the US, and Trump's executive order has issued a blow to him financially.
Then President Trump, he made a travel ban to 7 countries, which one of them was Iran. We did have a big problem, and since now we are carrying that problem with us. The problem is, most of my clients, they are old people. So when they heard, President Trump says travel ban, Iran is in travel ban, they thought if they go to Iran, they cannot come back again to United States. So they are scared to go. So that's why my business became down and down and down. I used to have 7, 8 people working for me there, and now only is me and maybe sometimes my wife helping me.
He lost $1 million in the first year of the travel ban, but Ferhad doesn't demonize Trump for the personal sacrifices that he's endured.
So our people, they are not happy. Believe me, I was looking at the news. They said President Trump stopped the war 10 minutes before they are starting because he found out 150 people they're going to kill. He said stop the war. But I was talking to some of my friends in Iran. They said we were waiting. We were waiting something happened. Maybe these people leave us alone. The government leave us alone. We find our freedom. We find our life here.
Iran has to change its tune before I meet with them.
I was supporting President Trump because he's the one who was serious about the problem in Iran. Sometimes, he's giving us the negative, but sometimes it's a positive. Most of my people here, we are against the war. We don't want a war.
The Iranian diaspora here isn't just another assimilating minority population. There's a complex split that comes with being caught between enemy governments. While there's pride for a much-loved homeland steeped in history and tradition, there's also a distancing from a strict, revolutionized territory. This eclectic mix of Jewish, Baha'i and Shiite Iranians are united in ways hard to imagine in Iran. But the constant threat of war creates an estranged identity. This community can't ever go home to Iran, but they rarely ever feel like they belong in today's America. Interesting look there at the Iranian diaspora, particularly in Los Angeles. We'll get into a little bit more about the social aspect here, but there are a number of anti-regime groups, though, both in the US and in Europe. One of them is the self-titled MEK, the Mujahideen of Iran. They're pushing for a regime change, and some say that they're a terrorist group, some call them a peaceful resistance group. Washington is quite invested in this group, though. Yadvan, can you talk to us a little bit about this group, what they want, and why Washington is so interested?
Originally, they were against the Shah's regime. They were actually a guerrilla organization, had a great deal of support up to 1980. Since then, they turned to terrorism against the Islamic Republic. They killed over 2,000 leaders of the Islamic Republic. They had to flee the country and work with Saddam Hussein. So in Iran now they're seen as basically traitors who worked with the enemy Saddam Hussein. But they have a great deal of money. We don't know where the money is from. And they use the money to have big shows in Paris they bring in people from Eastern Europe to rallies and
American politicians, I gather.
Yes, and a lot of American politicians, including Bolton, are basically on their payroll. So it is actually a new low in American politics, because if you look at the Mujahideen, they're now actually a religious cult. Led on by one person.
But given their links to Bolton and the White House, is this an opportunity for them to actually have a chance at helping to shape policy in Iran?
Well, it's a sign of desperation, I think, because they're basically scraping at the bottom of the barrel to find someone they could basically in Iran claim that they're supporting. And not long ago, actually, Bolton promised the Mujahideen that within a year they would be in Iran, but presumably in power. So this is again a sign that it's really a pretty critical situation. If American politicians are backing some group like the Mujahideen, it's really a serious matter.
It's interesting, Camelia, listening to some of the stories in Los Angeles and some of the other Iranians I've spoken to, they have a very strong, deep connection to their rich heritage, yet they also seem to feel like they have a little bit of a split in their identity in terms of not wanting to associate themselves too much with the Iranian political agenda, but also feeling on the outside in terms of the way the US is dealing with Iran. How would you say this affects the Iranian-American identity?
Iranian American are like the Cuban here. They have a very deep connection with their country. As you mentioned, maybe some of them even are so much Americanized and cannot be so much associate themselves with the social events in Iran. But in general, this travel ban or those humanitarian pressure on the Iranians, all of them makes them to be united against the policy has been pursued by Washington, D.C. Even I like little compromise to what with Professor Abrahamian said about Mujahideen Khalq. When it comes to such a political group that is having a negative impacts on Iranians inside or outside Iran, we would see them also very united. For example, I could say they prefer to support monarchists like Reza Pahlavi's in Los Angeles rather than stand with the people like Mujahideen Khalq, who have the full support from American administration, but has been portrayed as a traitor and as the people who are enemy of the Iranian itself. They are not politically engaged, those people you were talking about, but because of their numbers and because they were so deep inside of the American culture involved, it can be counted in the future to having an impact in American policies if they want to step forward or support a candidate or make some changes in Washington, D.C. Iranians are very politicized no matter where they are living at. And
very educated.
Thank you. And they are so much united that we could say we can promise. And
well, on that note, actually, what I've seen is that given their level of education, and often they've come from fairly well-to-do backgrounds to the US, is there some sort of animosity and hostility towards the US given that they have been grouped under this travel ban and have been sort of, sectioned off as a people that should be restricted?
I'm not saying even in Iran anyone are against President Trump because of this travel ban or because the extra pressure he has put in on Iranian government over withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal. The same thing, the same kind of frustration is among of the Iranian communities here. They may are upset about travel ban, but they were seeing that in part of those changes they like to see maybe Iranian government to be implemented inside, give more social freedom to the people. Definitely, I'm not supporting the sanctions. It has huge impacts on Iranian life. My own family lives in Iran. I have relatives in Iran. But I'm seeing the system have to make some changes in order to open up with the international community, which it can benefit all Iranians.
On that point, I mean, I think everyone would benefit from a better Iran-US relationship, particularly Iranian Americans or any Iranian living abroad and in Iran. Yervan, what would a better relationship between Iran and the US look like, and how would it be achieved?
Well, I think better relations, it's not mean friendship. It doesn't mean, like the good old days where the Shah was the American gendarme of the Middle East. But I think what Obama wanted was some sort of normalized relationship where there would be a diplomatic relationship. But if Iran had difficulties with, let's say, Saudi Arabia or Israel, those would be the differences between those countries, not necessarily American problems. Trump talks about America first. In many ways, I think the Obama policy was much more America first. America will do things that are of its interest. And if one of its interests is to have a reasonable good relations with Iran. And if Israel doesn't like that, or the Saudis don't like that, that's their problem. They shouldn't impose their policies on U.S. policy of attitude towards Iran.
Testing and vulnerable times. Thank you both for the discussion today. Really interesting. So thank you to our guests there, and that's all we have time for on this show, unfortunately. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. You can contact us on Facebook and Twitter @TRT World and let us know what you think. And thanks to the team here in New York. Please join us next time on The Square.